Hello, my name is Angus, and this is my culminating project, which is a journey of my 3D modeling and animation. So, it's a little bit about myself. This is my third and final year at New Vista. I transferred as a sophomore from Lyons High School. I'm a dancer. I've been dancing for around 9 to 10-ish years, but it's only a hobby and not an actual career path that I want to pursue. I'm a mostly self-taught 2D and 3D animator and modeler. I say mostly because this project is really the only form of teaching that I've received in this subject. And that being said, I've only really been doing art since 2017 and animation specifically since around mid-2018. And I plan on going to college at CalArts and study experimental animation. So just a little overview of my project. It's basically a series of 3D modeling and animation projects that are both large and small and are all created with Blender, which is a free and open source 3D modeling and animation software that's online. And so the first half of the project is through an online Udemy class, and this covered learning the basics of Blender's interface and how to basically 3D model. And that included a total of 5 projects, or you can call them assignments because they're part of a class. And the second half of the project is through my personal projects, and these are 5 large and 3 small, and then 3 projects out of those 8 large and small projects must include 3D and 2D animation combined. And this half of the class is kind of my own take on 3D modeling and doing projects that I actually want to do aside from the class. And kind of my intention with this project is to experiment and learn 3D art and apply it to my own artistic style. So now we're going to get into my actual projects that I did, and this is my evidence of learning and my journey. So this was our very first unofficial project in the online class, and it covered the ultimate basics of Blender and 3D modeling, which kind of introduced us to using tools such as scaling, rotating, extruding, and duplicating objects to create very basic models like this well here. And I very quickly realized that I could take different aspects of what I learned in this online class and apply it to my own creativity and vision. And that's exactly what I did here. You can see the house in this scene is made up of almost completely out of the same objects and tools that you saw in the last picture. And then from there, I decided to turn it into a small forest scene with different trees and logs and rocks and such. And it's actually probably a lot less work than you might think it is because, again, I'm only using the very basics of Blender, which are those tools that I mentioned before. And a lot of the objects are just duplicates of one original object, like these trees here. You can see there's a ton of trees in this scene, but they all came from 2 original trees that I modeled to begin with. And so all I had to do was model these true trees, and then the rest of them are just duplicates of these trees here. So it's really interesting to see how far you can go with just the basics of modeling. So I continue to explore that, which brings us to our next project. And in this project, which is and similarly to the last one, the online class taught us how to model a simple Mayan pyramid, which is obviously the main focus of the scene, which I then utilized to create another scene surrounding it, this time with ancient ruins and oasis. And this one took a bit longer than the previous project because it was much more detailed and with all these ancient ruins and such. But one of the most important things that I learned very quickly into my journey is that efficiency is one of the most important factors in any large 3D project. And an example of utilizing Blender's available tools to do so is using something called Bezier curves, which you can see here on the left panel, which is just this little orange thing. And with just one simple click, you can actually rotate a Bezier curve around a pivot point and create an object in that path of rotation, which is exactly how I created this bowling pin here. And so that's cool and all, but why stop there? And with only a little bit of effort, you can actually turn one simple object into this kind of nice scene that pops out a lot more and really catches your eye, a lot more than one simple bowling pin would. And again, this is all utilizing tools that make the process more efficient, so you don't have to spend tens of hours on a scene that should only really take a couple. So now we're stepping more away from the basics and getting deeper into the more complicated functions and tools of 3D modeling, which here is mostly using more realistic textures and materials. But even more significantly with this project, which was building a chess set, the hardest thing about it was accurately getting all of the pieces and measurements of the board and the pieces to fit a real-life chess scale. And to do that, you have to use a lot of one, you have to use a lot of reference material, and two, you also have to do a lot of research to know exactly what dimensions each piece is. And so for the king piece, as an example, and along with all the other pieces, this is a time lapse here of me modeling the king piece. I found a picture of the chess set online, which you can see in the background of this video. And then match the picture within Blender to the right dimensions of an actual piece, and then begin modeling following what the picture actually looked like. And I'm going to fast forward a bit through this so you don't have to sit through all of it. But you can see all I'm doing is just matching up and making it a little bit of an easier process for myself to match up a model with this picture, which will then in the end turn out to be the right dimensions and the right scale because I used an online reference material. And there you can see that's what it looks like. And so that ended up giving me this, which in total this in total this project took me around 16 hours to complete. The online class also taught something called an asset portfolio, which is the video that you're watching now on the right. And its purpose is to show off all of the models and materials it made one by one, so someone can get a good understanding of what skills you have and what actually went into this project. And I also started messing around with different camera rotations around a scene to get a lot more kind of unique look at the scene, so you can get you can take in a lot more of what I actually completed. So moving on, this is the final product I did as part of the online class, and is also the first full 3D animation that I created. And animation in Blender is kind of a whole new field and area to learn by itself on top of modeling. And kind of the entirety of 3D animation is centered around these things called armatures, which you can see here in this bottom picture. You can see there's a yellow one here. That's the armature that's currently selected. And armatures are basically digital bones that you put in your model that you created, and they allow you to move them around like you would a puppet in real life. And this project was inspired by the Pixar lamp that jumps on the eye in the beginning of all Pixar movies. And these are just a few photos of my process, but this animation here is they call it the workbench animation, and it's the animation without any lighting or material, and it's just kind of get a feel of what your scene is going to look like very, very early on. And then this is going to be the final product, and this took around 16.5 hours to create. Okay, so for the second half of my project, which is my personal projects, I took everything that I learned from the online class and applied it to my own projects that I wanted to actually create. And something that I've always wanted to do is experiment with combining different mediums and seeing what they could create together. So in these first two projects, I experimented combining 2D and 3D animation together. And you can see in both of these animations that the background is actually made in Blender in 3D, which I then drew over frame by frame in a 2D animation software, which is how I created these. And the one on the left is took around 12.5 hours, and this one on the right took 9 hours. And so this theme of experimenting and just messing around with Blender to see what I can create is persistent throughout all of my personal projects. Like this one here, where I experimented a lot with different materials and actually figured out that you could create something that looked vaguely like a planet surface. And so I just kind of went from there and created this nice little scene that features those materials as kind of a unique material and kind of a highlight of the scene. And the same thing here. This was using a lot of reference video and images that I actually followed, and I actually followed an online tutorial to do most of it, but it still reflects that experimentation aspect of my personal projects. And this project was a lot of fun to mess around with the different neon lighting and the lighting aspects in general to make it look kind of neon cyberpunky. So this is probably my favorite project that I made, and this project as a whole, and mostly because it was the first time that I actually envisioned something in my head and then successfully replicated it and created it in Blender. It took around 11.5 hours to create, and all the movement / animation you see is actually just the camera moving around a stationary scene. Okay, so now getting into my smaller projects. This is actually the initial render that I created for the project that you just saw. And I realized after creating this initial render that I could turn it into a much larger project, which again is the project that you just saw. So this is the first one that I created, and it only took around 4 hours. So this is actually a recreation of a render made by someone else that wasn't done in Blender. And I wanted to challenge myself and see if I could actually create it in Blender, which I think I was fairly successful in doing, and it only took, again, around 4 hours to make. This project was a result of my experimenting with different ways to add materials to objects, which was through real-life images that I found online and imported into the software and actually pasted onto the sides of each object in the scene. This is a process called UV unwrapping, and it's very effective if you want kind of a realistic look to your scene, but it does take super long, which is why this project took around 11 hours. But I do like the kind of the aesthetic of the scene and how it looks kind of run down with those real-life pictures. So for these next few projects, they actually weren't required to be part of my culminating project, but because I found myself having extra time after I completed everything I needed to do, I decided to try and learn sculpting, which is mostly used to create organic and natural objects or life forms in a 3D scene. So I used it to create a few different heads and then manipulated them to create different kind of artworks. And this is a small process of me creating this head here. Which I kind of referenced in a picture of an old man to create. And so sculpting is a very tedious process, but I think the end results are incredibly satisfying. And this is one of my favorite pieces I made with sculpting, and again, experimentation for me is key. And this is actually the last 2D project that I have recently made, which is again utilizing sculpting, and I couldn't decide which background I liked more on these pictures, so I decided to use both. But yeah. Okay, so now this is my time log. My original project hours took 31.5. My Udemy class hours were 71, and my personal project hours were 78, which gives me a total of 180.5 hours. But again, the projects that I just mentioned, the sculpting projects, I didn't count as part of my hours, but if I did, I would probably have more around 220 hours, I would say. This was my mentor, Tom Wingard. He's an independent film producer. He makes music videos, feature films, and works on Netflix documentaries. He's also a production manager in IT at Sparta Combat League and Sparta Media Group. He's also a professional dancer, which is how I met him, through my dance studio. And we spent 5+ hours together, which mostly involved project planning, logistics, goals, film perspective, because he knows a lot about the film scene. He gave a lot of film perspective on the animations that I created. We also talked a lot about my future after this. And he also does have a connection to Boulder International Film Festival. So I was actually able to submit a couple of my animations to that film festival, which unfortunately didn't get actually into the festival, but it was still a good experience otherwise. And now a little excerpt of my reflection. Ultimately, the purpose of this project was to both introduce and familiarize myself with the 3D art world and explore respective career paths. This project not only did more than that, but fulfilled my initial desire of an enjoyable and reliable culminating project. Throughout the course of this entire project, my knowledge of 3D modeling has grown exponentially, both in terms of familiarity and understanding of Blender's interface and 3D modeling and animations as a whole. This project has taught me countless lessons, one of the most important being time management and efficiency. Often completing projects in an efficient and less time-consuming manner is incredibly important, as some projects can reach upwards of weeks or even months to complete. And often exploring and messing around with Blender is the best way to come up with project ideas, which is how I completed a lot of my personal projects. And with the help of this culminating project, which was a large part of my art portfolio in general, I was able to get accepted into almost every school that I applied to, including CalArts' Experimental Animation Program and Rochester Institute of Technology's Animation Program. And so after completing this project, my initial desire to continue exploring 3D art has only increased, and I hope to do so more in the future. And now just a little bit of quick advice for underclassmen starting their culminating project or will start thinking about it soon. This is kind of specific advice, but I would try and break your project up into smaller parts, like having various different projects all under one large project, kind of like what I did. And this kind of allows a shift of focus and ability to not get caught up on one thing, which can often impede the whole project and build a lot of frustration, which I have seen in my classmates' projects. And by having multiple parts / projects under one large project, you can move from one thing to the next, which feels a lot more refreshing and motivating. And also, it's perfectly okay to pick something you've never actually done before, because if you're interested in it, you can find some way to make it work, which is how I did this project. So thank you for listening to my culminating project video, and I hope you have a good day.